name is Galen Boffman. I'm Director of Communications for International Cure. This week, International Cure hosted a gathering of prison reform activists and experts, including criminology and criminal justice academics, people formerly incarcerated, chaplains and prison ministers, people who have been victims of crime, judicial officials, family and friends of people in detention, as well as authorities from the Thailand Department of Corrections. These experts have come together in Bangkok this week to discuss national and global trends in criminal justice and prison reform. International Cure is a nonprofit, non-governmental organization holding consultancy status with the United Nations. Cure was founded 42 years ago to advocate for human rights of prisoners and those whose lives have been affected by criminal justice systems around the world. Participants from more than 15 countries in Asia, North America, Africa, and Latin America report on the concerns considered and positive lessons learned during the 4-day conference. The gathering in Bangkok was built on 5 previous Cure conferences, including New York, Geneva, Washington, and Abuja. Principled statements made by advocates at great personal risk, exposing conditions, abuses, and corruption to an international audience are a vital vehicle for reform. It is only by shedding light on these human rights abuses that those nations engaging in such conduct might end these horrors. One advocate joined us from Rwanda with a message of hope and reconciliation, direction from a country that has learned from its own deep national trauma after the loss of 1 million people in tribal hostilities in 1994. 20 years thereafter, reconciliation has been effected between the Hutu and Tutsi tribes, an unimaginable success based on hope and faith in the African spirit. In the words of one conference participant, Monsieur Obiora Ike of Nigeria, quote, "Entire humanity is bounded by the spirituality and philosophy of being human. This is what is described as human dignity. The denigration or promotion of the humanity of any one person translates to the denigration or promotion of the entirety of humanity. I am free if others are free. My freedom is bound to the freedom of others. If one person is in jail, humanity suffers the deprivation of the freedom of its member. That is why we must confront the inhumanity in prisons. It is a universal appeal to stand for individual rights, prisoner rights, human rights, social rights, economic rights, and political rights of all persons and at all times." This is, in essence, the content of the 1948 Universal Charter of the Human Rights. Religious traditions of mankind and constitutions of nations and timeless traditions of civilization. This vision of universal and inalienable human rights has found expression in the fundamental guidelines contained in the Bangkok Rules, much of which still are not applied in practice, despite many efforts by leaders. The Princess of Thailand has taken a lead in this direction. International Cure statement from the 6th Global Conference includes many challenges still remaining, and today we have 5 experts from around the world to address these challenges, the lessons learned from their work, and the positive progress that can be celebrated in this area. Concerning the conditions of female prisoners, Sharon Fast, lecturer in law at the University of Hong Kong, emphasizes the violence and depredation which women suffer, particularly in prisons worldwide. Gender discrimination is a reality behind prison walls, undermining the Universal Charter of Human Rights. Therefore, improving the situation of female prisoners remains a principal and urgent challenge. According to Sharon Fast, and I quote, "Criminal justice systems around the world are built and run by men. The context and circumstances in which women come in contact with the law and their specific needs once incarcerated are ignored." Brett Collins of Australia posits this: "Services for the benefit of prisoners paid by taxpayers have instead been hijacked by service providers. Health services become the torture of forced medication, causing disorientation and sickness. Rehabilitational services abuse trust as a weakness. Education and traditional services are irrelevant, and legal services don't include personal access to the law. To become effective, prisoners need the right to choose from trusted NGO providers. Dr. Tang Biao described the widespread use of severe torture in China. It is believed that thousands of prisoners have been tortured to death in detention centers. Issues of torture, execution, solitary confinement, and extrajudicial confinement remain a constant challenge in China. Enormous effort is needed through legal and political instruments to protect the dignity and human rights of persons according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Each of our panelists will offer brief remarks followed by a period of questions and discussion. At the conclusion of the panel, many members from the conference will be available at the front for individual comment. Thank you. I will begin at the far end of the table. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Is it clear? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
Be sure to say your name.
Okay. Yeah. My name is Sutari Vanasiri. I'm a policy coordinator with Amnesty International Thailand, based in Bangkok. Today is a great honor to be on this panel, and I'm glad that I have an opportunity to share with you the outcome of our study and documentation related to the juvenile justice system and administration in Thailand. First of all, I would like to start with the legal framework. The main law that used to administrate the juvenile justice system is the Act on Juvenile and Family Court and Procedure. It came into effect in 2011, and the aim of this law is to establish the procedure that will divert children and youth from criminal justice process. So all the juvenile and family court nationwide, we have additional role and duty to seek for special measure in lieu of the criminal proceeding before the prosecution, during the trial, or before the coming up with a judgment, with the aim to minimize the harms that may be caused by the children to be intervene with the law. So according to this act, it gives a new definition of the child and youth. A child means a person above 10 years old to 15 years old, while a youth means a person above 15 years old to 18 years old. It should be noted that the age of criminal responsibility in Thailand was raised from 7-year-old to 10-year-old in 2008. However, this minimum age is still below the international accepted standard. The international standard said that it should be 12 years old. So this act has laid out the basic right and procedural safeguard for children in conflict with the law, such as the presumption of innocence, the right to be notified of the charge, the right to counsel, and the right to present of their parent. So there is authority, government authority that is in charge in executing the juvenile and family court order and judgment, which is the Department of Juvenile Observation and Protection. This department will overlooking 77 juvenile observation and protection center in each province across the country, with 19 vocational training center. I would like to give also the overview of the juvenile delinquency statistic in Thailand. So the number of the case processes by this department have slowly decreased over the past 6 years from about 50,000 cases in 2007. It was reduced to about 30,000 cases in 2012. However, the number of the drug-related cases are on a sharp rise, while other offenses such as theft, possession of firearm, and physical assault are in declining. The recidivism rates are considerably high, from 12.92% in 2007. It is reduced to 11.34% in 2011. However, in 2012, there's increase, a surge, like a sharp increase to 19% in 2012. So according to this law, the police are also allowed to arrest the children and youth with the arrest warrant, and the children or youth has to be brought to the family and juvenile court within the 24 hours at the time of arrest. And if the child or youth surrender themselves to the police, they will be brought to this protection and observation center in each province. So despite that, the international standard has said that the institutionalization should be the last resort to deal with the juvenile offender. In 2012, at least 5,500 juveniles were sentenced to be detained at this vocational center, and another 132 persons were sent to an adult prison, which is obviously is dangerous to their well-being and that development to be detained at the same place with adults who are convicted of several crimes. So the annual report of the Department of Juvenile Observation Center itself point out that the overcrowding condition in remand home and in the training center is a major challenge for the justice system, and at least 14 facilities have the juvenile offender that exceeding their dormitory capacity. And the overcrowding has led to frequent argument and confrontation among juvenile offenders themselves. It also remains a challenge for the facility or this vocational center to provide adequate food, education, medical care to meet the international standard and the individual needs of the child. Even though and additionally, there is not enough child protection officer to work in this juvenile center, comparing to the number of the child being detained there. So another quite shocking violation that we have found in our interview with juvenile officer is the human rights violation that they faced. And the children and youth are very vulnerable to physical abuse, ill treatment, or punishment at a different stage of the juvenile justice system. According to our interview with the juvenile offender, aged between 16 to 17 year old, and they were arrested between 2007 and to 2010. They revealed that the law enforcement officer have committed several kind of violation against them. So I can divide it in three stages. The first stage is the time of arrest and interrogation and question by police officer. So those interviews said that they were not informed of their right, or it was quite a difficult time for them to ask the police officer to contact their parents or their guardian to notify their arrest. And most of the juvenile officers that we interviewed said that they were physically or verbally assaulted by police officer during the time of arrest or during the transportation to the police station and during the time they are interrogated at the police station before they were brought to the court or to the juvenile center. Some of them alleged that they were tortured and ill or received ill or degrading treatment to extract the confession from them. So the alleged method used by police officers including beating, kicking, hitting, and putting plastic bag around their head to make them suffocate, or in worst case they will also apply electric shock to their toe. So this physical abuse mostly did not leave a visible wound or injury that they could use further in the court to make the complaint. Additionally, there were no examination by medical staff while they are under police custody. Even though in some cases legal counselors were able to come in and sit together in the interrogation room, but still there are many cases that the lawyer could not enter the room, or the lawyer were only called after the confession was already extracted from them. So the second stage is the pretrial detention at the remand home. There is also a report of corporal punishment in this remand home, and those who their parents cannot secure financial bail for their early release have to remain in this remand home for quite a number of time, quite a long time. And then they also report that they were physically or verbally abused by their fellow juvenile offender. And a solitary confinement is also reported to be used as a form of punishment, which may last up to a few months. The last stage is after the trial, when they are sentenced to be detained and rehabilitation in this vocational training center. The vocational training center in Thailand predominantly is a closed institution that offering rehabilitation and correction for juvenile offender. However, the environment is very similar to a prison, with high wall, with barbed wire, with quite restrict rule and regulation for the juvenile offender who live there to follow. So all of the juvenile offender we interview told us that they experience verbal and physical abuse, including corporal punishment committed by officer or by their fellow juvenile offender, with the acknowledgement of the officer since the first day they enter the facility. So the officer, in some case, officer treated them as if they are vicious criminal. They would be beaten with large stick, slap or kick without a particular reason. And some of them even told me that they feel that they are less a human than other being because the way they were treated. For example, to engage in a conversation with the officer, they have to kneel down on the floor and speak. If they want to go to the toilet, they have to ask for a permission. And so one of them said that during that time, I feel like I am less a human than other people. So the culture of violence is quite deep-rooted and is quite widespread in this vocational training center. The old or the senior juvenile offender are encouraged to give a welcome ceremony to the newcomer, which this welcome ceremony in practice is mean beating and kicking them. And then in some case, if the juvenile offender violated the rule, the heavy corporal punishment such as the beating by officer will be used. One of the interviewers told me that he was beaten 60 times with a large stick for violating the house rule. So to wrap up, apart from the overcrowding condition, the one of the very serious problem in the juvenile justice system in Thailand is the violence and corporal punishment and ill treatment or degrading treatment that has been used against them, and an effort to rehabilitate or correct them or reintegrate them in the society will go in vain if they are the only thing that they learn in this center is only about using more and more violence. So I hope that there will be we will call for a more improvement in this standard also in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm Brett Collins from Justice Action in Australia. I speak on behalf of prisoners in Australia and detainees generally, both immigration refugees and people, men and women in mental health institutions. The issue that we have directed the international audience and attention to is regarding the use of prisoner services against the benefit of prisoners themselves. Now, we have come to the situation where prisoners inside the cells fear the doctors more than the guards. If they say something that could have them in some way regarded as being mentally ill, then that is used against them and they become forcibly medicated. So this lack of control by prisoner services is actually symbolic of the lack of respect for prisoners and prisoners' rights. What we're proposing, we proposed to the international audience, was that those services, in fact, which are paid for by taxpayers, should in fact be controlled by the prisoners themselves. Instead, they've been hijacked by the service providers. We've come to a situation where health services have become the torture of forced medication. Right, actually causing disorientation and sickness. Our women are overweight. Our women have diabetes, and over long periods, then in fact have heart problems. The rehabilitation services, which require a confidential disclosure of information, is not respected. Confidentiality has no status inside prisons, and if you do make an exposure, then those same exposures that you actually where you offer in order to get some services are used against you. Education services and training services are irrelevant. When you're staying in a cell and you haven't got access to the teachers, it is of no value. And legal services are a joke. To have not even an ability to access the courts in many situations where you haven't the status unless you have someone outside in the community to actually vouch for you is wrong. To not be able to put your own case, to have access to law reports and have access to peer support is wrong. The answer to this is very simple. The answer is, of course, that the services that are available should in fact be services which you can choose, that you want yourself. Instead of having service providers wish to curry favour with the government that actually funds them, they must indeed service the consumers and satisfy the consumers. So the only way you can actually create a situation that is efficient is to ensure that there is a market for their services, that prisons have the choice of who the service providers are. And this is called the principle of self-directed services. It's adopted internationally, particularly for disabled people, and it must also be used to create a market of trusted NGO providers from whom prisoners can choose. This is an issue of fairness, of equity. It's an issue for efficiency, and the taxpayers expect that their money be used effectively. So it's an issue, it's a winnable issue, and it's a disgrace, and it's also it's a blight on the community and on the transparency of government that service providers can abuse their opportunity to service vulnerable people and use that opportunity. So we offer a really important choice. The choice is that prisoners must have a market, must be able to choose from their service providers, and so other than that, it's an inefficient use of taxpayers' money, and it should. And prisoners say we want this remedied.
My name is Teng Biao, a human rights lawyer from China and a scholar. Sorry? I'm the president of NGO China Against the Death Penalty. And there are so many human rights problems in China, and here I just raise 3 points. The first is death penalty. Before 2007, the Supreme People's Court took back its power to review all death penalty cases. The number of death penalty executions more than 10,000 every year. And now we believe the number is going down, maybe 5 or 7,000, but the number is regulated as top state secret, and we have took many cases with the death penalty cases related to wrongful conviction. So there are so many defendants were sentenced to death penalty, but there's no sufficient evidence, and they most of them are tortured, and some of them have been executed, but some years later they were proved to be innocent. And the reason there are so many wrongful convictions, even in death penalty cases, are mainly first is there's no judicial independence. The judges are totally controlled by the Communist Party or the government. And the second is the widespread use of torture. And the third is lawyers' rights were frequently violated. And the second thing I want to raise is torture. Torture is frequently used not only in prison but also in detention center, mainly in pre-trial detention center in China. I have documented hundreds of cases with the citizens who were tortured to death in detention center and prisons. And according to Falun Gong website, at least 3,000 Falun Gong practitioners had been tortured to death, and even political prisoners had experienced torture, like Liu Ping, Yuan Fengchu, Yuan Xiaohua, Li Biyun. These human rights defenders detained last year, and they were reported to be tortured. And the third one is extrajudicial detention. Very recently, the Chinese government abolished re-education through labor as a typical extrajudicial detention, but we remain some other forms of extrajudicial detention or extra-legal detention. For example, the Legal Education Center, we call it brainwashing center, mostly targeting Falun Gong practitioners, like the mental hospital, sometimes targeting at the human rights activists, and custody for education, mostly targeting the prostitution, and extra-legal detentions like black jails, targeting the petitioners and human rights defenders and house arrest. You know the Nobel laureate Liu Xiaobo. After he was put into prison, his wife, after he won the Nobel Peace Prize, his wife, Liu Xia, was put under strict house arrest for more than 3 years. There are so many such cases: torture, extrajudicial detention, and the death penalty cases related to unfair trial. So I hope these problems can arouse international attention. And the National People's Congress just began yesterday in Beijing. So we hope we have some recommendation. First, the People's Congress should ratify the ICCPR, and which the Chinese government had signed 15 years ago. And then release political prisoners like Dr. Xu Ziyong, Ilham Tohti, the Uyghur human rights activist, Liu Xiaobo and Gao Zhisheng, many others. And then to abolish all kinds of arbitrary detention, and then make meaningful judicial reform to meet the international standards, like the Convention Against Torture, which China ratified in 1988, and then publicize the statistics of death penalty, and then stop to persecute Falun Gong practitioners. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
I think the privilege we have of sharing some thought here in Bangkok concerning the situation of prisoners worldwide under the guidance of CURE, an international organization, is one that we all cherish. And what is most critical is that the press, the media, carry out their constitutional role of sharing this kind of information to the larger public. The world of prisons is a reality. It exists in virtually every country of the world. And prisons are not what the United Nations General Charter for Human Rights advocates. The UN Charter believes that every human being is born free and equal, and that for those who even break the law, they must be given also human treatment when they are in prisons by virtue of the structures which societies have created. What we have discovered, whether it's in Africa, from Nigeria and other countries, or in Asia, or in the United States, or in Latin America, or even in Australia, as we share these thoughts, is to say, one, prisons are structures of evil. They do not do the work of reforming the inmate. Rather, inmates come out graduates of more crime in many cases. If you send a human being to prison because he has committed a crime and you want to balance justice, then the care and the type of structures put in within prisons will be leading towards this. But many prisons do not reform the inmate. Rather, like in Nigeria, the young juveniles especially who go into prisons when they have committed a small crime stay with adults who are proper criminals and graduate, get a PhD in criminology and criminal activity, and come out and cause more havoc in society. Is that the kind of society we want? When you look at the situation of torture of inmates, which begins already at the levels of the police that has to get confessions from people before even charging them, trying to put people who are innocent under tremendous pressure of agreeing to things they do not do. And then, of course, the entire judicial process, whereby people are put in before courts that are almost like kangaroo, where if you pay more, you get justice, that's you are freed. If you don't have money, you are in trouble. To such an extent, therefore, that many of the prisons in most countries of the world harbor the poorest of the poor. And those who commit real crimes, taxation evasion, corporate crimes, those who are real, who flout the rules, who abuse with impunity, they buy themselves off and they are never before prisons. And yet, they insist and manage the prison system. They give the contracts, they collect the monies of prisoners, and you keep on wondering, what kind of society do we want to build? Or you take the case of women in prisons, which happens in my country, that even children who are born of women who have broken the law become co-inmates of their mothers and graduate living in an environment of slum, stinky, indecency. What kind of society are we building when we allow children and their mothers to stay in prison, or even pregnant mothers to deliver their children in prisons? These and many other questions, therefore, challenge some of us who are active in the world of building a universal dignity for all human persons, knowing fully well that if one human being is incarcerated and denied his or her freedom, virtually every free human being is also incarcerated and denied his or her own freedom. We cannot close our eyes to the situation of people we have put behind bars and presume they are not citizens. United Nations Charter, constitutions of countries, America's Constitution for Freedom, the Nigerian Constitution, the many religions of the world, the civilizations which have built entire humanity, all of them appeal to a certain standard of dealing with fellow human beings. Now look at the laws. Many of the laws are laws, but some laws are unjust. That something is a law does not make it just or fair. You can have a law known as apartheid, but that it's a law but discriminates a fundamental reality that all human beings are free and equal does not justify it. So the laws we make also need reforms, that laws conform to instruments of justice, of fairness, especially with regard to the poorest of the poor. The conclusion of a presentation like this is to say that from the Nigerian perspective, and Nigeria is Africa's largest, most populated country, from the Nigerian perspective, we have prisons that are like hell above ground. Prisons are no places for reformation. They are not even places for restoration. They are also not homes where you can say you have done something like balancing the justice in the question of the death penalty. For a government to make a law that kills a citizen who has killed another citizen is for that government to be illogical, losing 2 or 3 instead of just 1. Why should we lose 3 deaths? Why should we lose 2 citizens? A has killed B. Therefore, we kill B who has killed A and deprive their families of whatever it is that are associated with those killings. There are, in a modern world, better, more organized, more responsible ways of balancing justice, even in cases of those who have committed crimes that are capital in nature. For example, instead of making someone who has killed another be killed and put up in a gaol, or cut the neck, or by firing squad like happened under military governments in Nigeria, people gather in the stadium and the armed robber is shot and people shout and clap as if it was a jamboree. Governments all over the world can make that kind of person who has committed a crime of this nature work for the society. by doing things that also balance his conscience, pay back to communities, instead of depriving two lives. These and many others, therefore, make us restless. And we do think that because, right, like today, anybody can be a prisoner anywhere. And most human beings are even prisoners from a spiritual point of view to their own selves. We need to humanize and to some extent push for the abolition of prisons or push for alternatives to prisons. And this is not unrealistic. There are alternatives to prisons. African nations have proved in their traditions that there is what you call restitution and alternative justice regulations. Why should a young boy go to prison because he stole a fowl, a chicken? Let the parents or the family bring back the fowl and the chicken and perform the rites, and the matter is sorted. But to build up files for a young boy who killed a chicken and to make judges and lawyers take sides, it costs the nation a lot of money. Bottom line, human rights apply to citizens even when we hold them in prisons. Therefore, working for the restitution, for the empowerment, for their human dignity, for their freedom is a challenge for Nigeria, for other countries, for the Universal Commission on Human Rights of the United Nations, and indeed for all people of goodwill. Thank you for listening.
Hello. Thank you for such opportunity to make a speech. My name is Aya Kuwayama. I'm from Japan. I am a scholar on criminal justice studies and human rights law in Japan, and also the researcher of the Center for Prisoners' Rights Japan, the very grassroots NGOs in Japan. The Center for Prisoners' Rights was founded in 1995 by some lawyers and civil people who have been working for prison reform. We felt necessary to bring more human rights violation cases to the courts and to strengthen international cooperation for promoting prison reform. Because since 2007, our prison law enacted about 100 years ago, Meiji era, then it had been never appropriate for the current prisons under human rights idea after the World War II. Then we founded an umbrella organization mainly for the purpose of legal support and advocacy. Specifically, our center purpose is firstly to investigate human rights violations in prisons and make reports and statements. And secondly, to provide legal advice to inmates, their family, and their law attorneys. Thirdly, to promote implementation of international human rights standards. So I want to introduce you several data on feature of Japanese prisons. Firstly, Japanese prison population rate is 52.5 per 100,000 national population. That is the almost lowest all over the world. For example, Denmark is 73, Norway is 72, even Finland is 58. That means Japan is a lower rate than Scandinavian countries that are famous for the lowest prison population region. Additionally, Japan's crime rate is also almost lowest. About homicide rate, it's only 0.8 per 100,000 national population. On the other hand, the USA is 4.7. That means Japan's supposed to be the safest country all over the world. However, please don't forget that we have still maintained the death penalty system. Next feature is about the scale of Japanese prison. We have 118 institutions for less than 70,000 detainees. But most are detained medium to large-scale prisons. almost half of detainees are detained in more than 1,000 capacity inmates prisons, so large scale. Moreover, it is characteristic that Japanese prisons are run by small number of officials. That means small number of guards must control or care large number of inmates in a big prison. Then, what about the background of people detained in Japanese prisons? Prison populations are decreasing now. But the population of recidivists who have been imprisoned more than twice are increasing. Remarkably, we can find many aged and disabled prisoners. Most of them have repeated entering prison because of not serious, the frivolous crime like theft. Some of aged prisoners, specifically who are over 70 or 80 years old, enter prison more than 10 times or more. Most of them will finalize their life inside of the prison. Moreover, more empirical studies showed there are many disabled persons, specifically intellectual disabled and mentally deteriorated detainees in prisons. In Japan, most prisoners must work as part of punishment. It means the court sentence. However, it is difficult for some of aged and disabled inmates to work as expected. Part of reasons of these facts supposed to be the lack of social support in the community when people failed getting job and live in poverty. Because many of recidivists, aged and disabled inmates have arrived at criminal proceedings and penal institutions at last without any necessary social welfare and medical support. Therefore, recently, Ministry of Justice have been showing a positive attitude to cooperate with the Health and Social Welfare Ministry and also with NGO working poor or other social marginalized people. This is one of our developing points on prison reform. As to other developed points, we can see the certain changes in the court decision. Court decisions tend to accept the prisoner's law petition more often than before, specifically in case of any failure of necessary medical treatment to inmates. And one high court issued the epoch-making decisions about voting rights of prisoners as unconstitutional. So how about the future of Japanese prison and prisoners? Certainly, we can say more people have become interested in prisons and prisoners' issues in Japanese community. Some ex-prisoners have just started working actively for helping their fellow. This is a new movement in the Japanese civil society. On the other hand, from inside of prisons, we have received many accusations on strict control and limitation since we had founded, especially prisoners' rights to contact outside world have been limited strictly even now. Moreover, I am worrying also about intolerance atmosphere reinforced in the Japanese society. In fact, voices urging more harsher punishment have never decreased. Then I am sure that it will be more important to enhance tolerance and human rights culture in the society. We can learn importance of this culture from discussion on prison and criminal issues. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sharon Fast. I'm a lecturer in criminal law at the University of Hong Kong, and I'm also a research officer in the Center for Comparative and Public Law within the same faculty. My center has recently engaged in some research. It's very early days, but we're looking at the standards and levels of implementation of the Bangkok rules. And so I thought I'd speak very briefly today about the unique features female prisoners and what's being done to address their special needs. So I guess I would start with the observation that there's almost nothing that isn't unique about the female prison population. From the nature of the offenses that they commit, which are largely nonviolent and petty crimes like theft and fraud and minor drug offenses, to the factors which bring them into contact with the criminal justice system. And these include poverty, sexual abuse, domestic violence, and single parenthood. So once they're inside the system, women have very gender-specific reproductive, hygienic, and mental health care needs. They are more likely to suffer from depressive disorders. They are exponentially more likely to self-harm within prison systems. Women have hygienic requirements that are related to menstruation, childbirth, and even menopause that the traditional prison system does not recognize or address. Incarcerated women are also very likely, if not almost certain, to have suffered from sexual or abuse or violence. And the treatment that they receive on reception into the prison system is particularly invasive. The searches are often conducted by male staff members. This can be very re-traumatizing and have a very degenerative impact on their mental health. And we know that globally, most women prisoners are in fact mothers, and that amongst these mothers, the majority are the sole or primary caregivers. And yet women with children in the criminal justice system pay a very steep price for visitation. They are strip searched. So here in the birthplace of the Bangkok Rules, we have gathered as a group to express our concerns over the global levels of implementation of the rules. Adoption of the rules is a significant and a very impactful way that countries can acknowledge the different needs that women prisoners have. And the rules also represent the very first instrumental tool to address the needs of children and parents in prison with their parents. So by voting to adopt the rules and by carefully monitoring the standards of implementation, countries can acknowledge that women in the criminal justice system can and do have gender-specific characteristics and needs, and countries can agree to respect and meet these needs. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, panelists. Do we have questions from the audience? Yes, sir. Please use the microphone in the back. Is it working?
Hello, hello. Okay.
Wonderful.
My name is Lance Woodruff. I work with Thai Government Media, MCOT. As most of you know, I'm assisting this conference this week, but that is as a volunteer, and I have been drawn into the circle of what you are considering by one of your participants, Hans Hollenbeck from New York. Now, I've lived in Bangkok for almost 50 years, and during most of that time I've been involved with the media. And I've never heard, until this meeting, the term Bangkok rules. I have no idea what you're talking about. Can somebody explain to me what the Bangkok rules are and what difference they make about anything?
Very, very briefly, they're a set of standards. So they're basically a best practices guideline for female prisons. And they include provisions on healthcare, on reception, on security provisions and searches, on the minimum space, for example, that women are permitted to have in their cells. And they have very detailed provisions on mothers and children. And basically, a lot of it echoes the provisions you'll find in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is what is the best interest of the child. They don't have, in that sense, there's much discussion that remains on this idea of aging out in the prison system. So they don't provide a concrete age at which it's considered acceptable for mothers and children to be separated. But the recommendation is that each prison system basically assess what the best interest of the child is. In Hong Kong, for example, 10 years ago, children were permitted to remain with their mothers until they were 9 months of age. But we now, the threshold now is 3 years, at which point they will be either turned over to family members or put into the social welfare system, depending on the particular abilities of the mother.
As a follow-up, how did the Bangkok rules come about? When did they?
It was in 2010, and they were considered a mechanism to bolster the standard treatment rules, which I believe are the Tokyo rules. And it was the Princess of Bangkok who had a particular interest in this area in incarcerated female prisoners. So 2010 is the short answer.
Thank you.
Other questions? Ah, yes, please. Feel free to queue at the mic.
My name is Vincent Omegwa. I'm from Nigeria. I live in Aurora, Colorado. This question is for Professor Ike. As a spiritual leader and a human rights activist, as well as a college professor, what is there in place in Nigeria for a coordination of prison ministry efforts by the churches and faith-based groups in Nigeria? Because I've asked a few questions of people who are involved in it, and they tend to be very isolated or isolationist in terms of their approach to not just preaching to the prisoners, but meeting their needs. Is there any effort by the Catholic Church, by the Protestant churches to come together and attack this problem together?
I would like to thank you for this question. The facts on ground are very clear. The world of prisons is the world of abandoned people. And those who go into prisons to help only out of charity. Prisons are not areas where normal people go to relate with, for the simple reason that society look upon prisoners as criminals, those who disturb us during the day and during the night, who steal our money, who cause trouble. Therefore, put them out. The normal thing, therefore, in recent times is that a galvanization of civil society organizations has been initiated. Civil society organizations are so-called NGOs, which areas of interest are varied, but definitely those of them working in the area of promotion of human rights, promotion of prisoners' rights, asking for legal reforms, pushing for penal reforms, pushing for judicial reforms. These have crystallized into the so-called Nigerian human rights organizations. Now, part of them are the faith-based organizations. They include the Christian groups. And within the Christian churches in Nigeria, for example, in Africa, the Catholic Church is a very strong voice. It has been a strong voice pushing for education, for health care, for social welfare. And now the Catholic Church has also gone into prison reforms and, let us say, prison advocacy. It is at an initial stage, at a beginning stage, let us say in the last 15, 20 years. It's not something that is long-term. We don't have Catholic prison chaplains employed by government, as you have them in other countries. any chaplain, Christian, Muslim, who goes into prison is going in as a volunteer. So they are not paid. And because, I mean, of course, generally it's a developing country and it's not, in the classical sense that you pay those who have to work in prisons. Many people also do volunteer work in prisons. For the Catholic Church as an organization, there is a coordination. There is the so-called Nigerian Congress of Catholic Prisons Pastoral Care. On the evangelicals, there is the so-called Prison Fellowship International. On the other, let me say, Protestant churches, there is no coordinated assistance. Rather, under the Christian Association of Nigeria, which includes everybody who is Christian, there is just statements made to government once in a while on what they should be doing in prisons and how they should not be. Like the death penalty is being challenged gradually by Christian churches, even though in the past Christian churches justified the death penalty, even with biblical foundations. And the attitude of many Christians, even now, is that we should not allow murderers and those who've killed others and the criminals and armed robbers and terrorists, we should not allow them roam the streets. And pedophilia, we should put them out. In fact, they should be killed. That's a general tendency. Bottom line is that there is some bright hope, in the sense, from your question, that many more people, by virtue of the globalization process, the access to the media, seeing what's happening elsewhere, Western influence in society, the United Nations becoming more assertive and more proactive in its programs, educational standards improving, and people knowing that actually tolerance is a better language than hatred. By virtue of these happenings, and also with the leadership within the Christian churches, I must say that with the Muslim hierarchy, there's something different. It's the prisons in Gashua in the north, and in Yobe and in Gombe, they are extreme. In Kano, it's another world. I don't want to talk about that. But on the lines of the Christian leadership and what I've tried to say, there is a growing hope that people are being coordinated gradually, but it is long-term, not achieved.
I'd like to address the question speaking for Australia. And also speaking as an ex-prisoner with the experience of decades in the area, we have always looked to the churches as being giving an opportunity for advocacy to bear witness to the excesses of abuses of humanity inside the prisons. However, in practice, they have failed. They've failed abysmally. There were many instances of decades of abuses in some prisons where the churches had easy access to the prisons and did nothing, and that's been exposed on many occasions. The weakness is that the administrations hold control of the jails and hold control of access to the prisons, and so many clergymen are concerned that they'll lose access to the prisons and access to individuals, and therefore won't be involved in policy issues. So there certainly is room for churches to bear witness to what's occurring, to make stands of principle, and to advocate on behalf of those people inside. And we would look to that to happen in the future. Probably a good example of how Christian churches have failed in Australia is where there was for a long period access to visitors at Christmas, on Christmas Day, where prisoners were actually had been visited by their families, and their children would come in to see them and share the special day of Christmas, the birth of Christ, and share it as a family. And then 3 or 4 years ago, the administration decided that it was too expensive to pay for the overtime in order that prison officers should remain there during the day for visits. And so we appealed on behalf of prisoners concerned to ensure that families did have their loved ones coming into them on on this special day. And we appeal to the churches themselves, in fact to the Catholic Church, at a special time when there was a coming together of an international gathering in Sydney, and we asked them for the intervention of the churches. And the churches talked about intervention, but they did nothing. So we look to the churches in future to take principled stands, and we certainly welcome them. We call on them, and we will involve them in all our campaigns.
Another question from the back.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing from your relative perspectives. My question, I wanted to start with Dr. Ike. You mentioned in talking about alternatives to prisons and alternatives to justice. I have done a lot of work with restorative justice, working both with juvenile offenders and prisoners coming out of the system and doing reentry work. And I'm aware that Thailand's juvenile system, at least 5-6 years ago, did have a process that they used with their juvenile offenders. And I'm wondering, and I don't have your name, the person who spoke to the juvenile system, if you might address, is there any type of restorative justice? Or is there something that's more related to a community-based type of justice that you might be referring to that can help deter and keep people from entering the criminal justice system completely?
Thank you for that question. Let us put it this way. Talking about the African context, and we do know that the African continent is the oldest in the whole world in terms of paleontology. The British came to Nigeria about 100 years ago. And once they came, prisons arrived with them. Before the British came, we did not have prisons. Prisons are walls. You build a wall in a community, and then you catch some people and lock them up there. This is a phenomenon of just less than a century. What has happened in the 10,000 years of Africa's history? What had happened was that people had a way to solve matters as they came. If someone had broken the laws of the village or of the community, like a young man steals a fowl that belongs to another family, and that young man had been detected and caught, he was reported to the village elders. What the village elders did was to locate that young man in the context of his or her family. So they brought the entire family members of the culprit before the village assembly. And then the person who was the victim had to say, my fowl was stolen. And this is the man who stole my fowl, my chicken. The family will dialogue, and at the long run, judgment will be given by the elders of the family, not locking him up in a hall and feeding him there with other people's chicken for 2-3 years, like the British introduced, but getting that family to accept that their boy had done something wrong, and they must restitute. They must bring not one fowl now, but 2 fowls to pay back. And when they brought the fowl and gave to the family that was deprived of their own chicken, then the village elders will pray over them, and the boy will be cautioned before everybody. And in that kind of situation, it was not just the 2 families that were present. Everybody in the village was there. So with that, people learned how not to commit crime in the future. Entire family was involved in the restitution process. The elders were part of the agenda. The victim was compensated. The aggressor was involved and knew that I wouldn't do it again. And there was even the spiritual chief, the priest in the village, who will then do incantations to the deities, to the gods, to pacify that the rains may fall and the sunshine will come. Because of this type of crime that had happened in the society, you could take killing, murder, and so on and so forth, adultery, and many other cases which society considered as, let me say, against the law of those times. We use in modern language alternative dispute resolution. We call them restorative justice. We call them community forms of integration, reintegration, reconciliation, because every act of justice and its failure is an aggression against the entire society. And if I commit a crime, one commits a crime, a police will catch that person on the road, bring before a judge who had no involvement, sentence that person to a court, not in Bangkok where the crime was committed, but perhaps in Pattaya, somewhere at the end of the world, or send them, even banish them to Australia for a crime committed in England. You send them to Australia, where did they reconcile society? So we have, as Africans, a model for dealing with justice issues, which unfortunately colonial history and modernity does not want to learn from. This is why we appeal that there must be, even from such African nations that have value, that have senses of justice and healing, that have, you might say, have ADR, alternative dispute resolution models, let them be put into modern forms of managing justice. And they will be useful, and they are compatible with modern society. It is not that they are not incompatible. We have not given them a chance because the British built the walls, put the boys out there who had committed crimes, locked them up, and that was all. And after 3 years, they came out again and did more. And then what did you do? What did you change in society? The chicken that was stolen had not been found. The boy had eaten 20, 30 chickens in the next 3 years he was in prison and was being fed by society when he should have been given back to society. I want to thank you for that question. And with that, just the next linkage, the numbers of juveniles in modern prisons. In my country, 85 to 90% are below the ages of 30. They have not gone to school because they have no access. They are poor because there is no money. They have no job because there is no employment. And the little crimes they do leads them to prisons, and they serve not 1 year, but several years. And why do they serve several years? Because they cannot pay a lawyer who will bring them out. So in essence, prisons have become a society, modern society's tragic manner of dealing with the poor. And then they put them off, lock them off there and say, I don't know, I don't see, I don't want to hear. And those who do that are rich people or many good people who do nothing. And not to act is in itself even a failure. So what we are appealing for is that human consciences must be raised, and people of goodwill activated from the legal point of view, from the political point of view, from the social point of view, from the cultural. People should be galvanized to look at, in every prisoner and offender, my own face. I see myself in an offender, because I will be there if he was not there. If the law will catch up with everybody who had broken a law. And most people outside have broken all the laws, traffic laws and everything you can think about. Not paying tax, not carrying their passport, whatever. The laws are so many. We've made out of God's 10 commandments, even number 11, just don't be caught. Because if you are caught, you will be following the rules. I mean, you will be there where the others are. Our appeal is allow other models. First of all, implement the United Nations minimum standards for the treatment of prisoners. Implement the Bangkok rules and all the other covenants and instruments of international institutions. Carry out the constitutions of countries as they have been written down. They are the laws of the land in terms of a humanization of the prison system, a humanization of the legal system, a coordination of the criminal justice system, that you don't have a police acting differently, judges acting differently, and then of course the prison system completely different. They are all serving the same human being. And above all, the corruption reduction in the prison business. Corruption is also part of the entire thing. You have to bribe a prison official, bribe a police officer, bribe a judge, bribe and so on. It's just unbelievable. And those who are poor don't have this money to pay. So they go the whole hurdle. Thank you for your question.
Another question from the back.
Should I respond first?
Sure. Just hold your question for a moment, sir.
Okay, yeah.
Please do.
So my name is Sutari.
And your
Yeah.
organization again.
And I'm from Amnesty International Thailand. And so thank you for the question regarding the alternative method that can could be applied with the youth who has been through the trial. So in Thailand, the sentence that was written down in the law, including warning, probation, fine, detention, and detain at this training center, and imprisonment, and also they also mentioned an alternative measure, but it did not really specific what kind of measure it would be used. But I also discussed with with the officer, and they say that one of the methods they use usually with the juvenile who commit drug-related offense crime, they will be sent to military training, which for me is ridiculous. Like, why would they, if you want to rehab a person, why would you send them to the military training? Because the military training require a lot of disciplinary, and sometimes it could also have some violence level involved. So I think this is not really a good method to work with the juvenile offender. And related to other like community reintegration or the restorative justice, I do have one like very beautiful example of one vocational center. It's the only one out of the 19 that have this method. They decide that they want to establish a new institution system that provide a second chance and a home and a school for this juvenile offender, not a prison. So they remove all the wall, and they remove all the barbed wire, and all the authority who work at that center will be dressed in a normal clothes. There is no uniform, there is no sign of any authority or weapon. They were not allowed to carry out walkie-talkie or any sign of like that can be used as a violence. And the juvenile offender at that center are allowed to dress whatever they like, or they can have any hairstyle that they have. And the director of this center told me that because this is one of the very basic recognition that you should give to them, that they are recognized as an individual person. In other vocational center or remand home, everyone will be dressed in the same manner in their uniform and shave their head, but this center want to make a difference. So apart from this, they also introduce many I would say like educational method to reform these children. For example, they use movie, and they use outdoor activity in order to support them to be reintegrated in the society. For example, the juvenile offender in this center will be allowed to contribute back to the society by doing volunteer work with the flood victim. When we had the flood in 2011 or 10, like they were able to help, and they were able to provide advice, or they were able to give a talk to other school students about their experience and share with them like how they have feel being in the juvenile justice system, and try to stop others from following the footsteps. And another very great example is the restorative justice that you have mentioned. This center has create a space and a platform for the juvenile offender and the victim family, or even the victim themselves, to meet and to talk, and for a long period of time. And there's also several cases that at the end the victim family expressly say that, okay, I forgive you for what you did to my family, to member. And then the juvenile offender feel that they are now free, and they will be able to live on and contribute back to the society again, because they feel that they have been forgiven for the crime, that even though all the newspaper or the media will label them as a vicious criminal, but at least the victim themselves or the victim family have actually given their forgiveness. So this is one of the very beautiful example that I can share.
Thank you. We had a question in the back. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Mong Jonu. I am the president of Burmese Rohingya Association in Thailand, known as BRAT. I am also a member of international advocacy group of Rohingyas, as well as I am a former political prisoner of conscience in 1974 from Myanmar. So I am a Rohingya, maybe some of here aware about that. I am a man, I am a person, came from a place where most of the largest prisoners in the world, this is the Arkan. More than 1 million Rohingyas are displaced in Arkan, Myanmar. So some newspaper like Human Rights, and also the Human Rights Organization, Human Rights Watch, Fortify Rights, and many others, they said that this is the largest prisoners in the world. It means we are not allowed, our people are not allowed to go to one place to another place. We are not allowed to buy the food from the market. This is the Sitwe, Arkan area. We are not allowed, completely not to go and get the, medical facilities. Maybe you know that. This is the Holland-based, I think, medicine without border. And every NGO and every groups are now already driven out by the Burmese government from my area. So we are silently avoided and killed in our area without any medical facilities. So I'm not giving this question, speeches here. I don't understand. I'm very appreciative of this, your meeting for some days, from 4th to 8th, I think. I'm very disappointed that none of the representative of my community, the Rohingyas, who are known as in the world one of the most persecuted people in the world, not we are saying. This is the United Nations and also some other organization, Voice of America, Al Jazeera, and the BBC. They are saying that one of the most persecuted people in the world about the detention, about the criminal laws, about the healthcare in the prison, blah blah. I have gone through it. Nothing is in our area. Forget about the healthcare. Forget about the women's rights. Forget about the in the prison, the facilities. Only our people can get sometimes one-time medicine. 1 year when UN, the reporters or the UN human rights, expert like Mr. Quintana visited the Myanmar. When they visited, they got some sort of medicine.
Why don't you allow one of our panelists to address your question?
My question is, do you have any program to talk about the prisoners who are unrecorded as political prisoners in Myanmar, including one medicine doctor, Dr. Tuhong? Maybe the Amnesty International highlighted about this. I have seen many, the last exhibition in the Thammasat University. Do you have any program to do something for the undeclared political prisoner in my area, including Dr. Tuhong, a medicine doctor who has been in the prison since 2012 when genocide has been started in my area, still going on? Do you have any program? Another one lawyer, Dr. Chola Ong, who has been in the prison and very old men without any medical facilities to help or to include your program to highlight around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We understand your question. Yes, please address the gentleman's question about the difficulty of reaching certain prison populations.
The submissions you have just made are very strong. They are a sad picture of the unjust situation we find in the world, in your country, in many other countries. What has been a philosophy, an agenda, not just for CURE, I think, but even for ourselves who work in Africa, is think globally, act locally. It is not possible for one organization to solve all the problems of the world everywhere. So what I would advise you is to have some local actors in your own country who will get support for the work they are doing on the spot. It will be very difficult and practically impossible for people like our own organization, CURE or mine in Nigeria, which is facing its own local problems, to solve the problems of not just Myanmar, but Afghanistan, the Taliban, Pakistan, and everywhere at the same time, with just because of resources and so on. So think globally, act locally. Can you start an organization? Do you know of organizations in your country that are active despite the very dangerous situation? And because I am aware from the press of the situation, even that Medicine Without Boundaries was stopped by the government and has just been allowed again, this is press. The facts we do not know. Who are your link persons who will be collaborators in improving the agenda of human rights and of prisoner rights in your country? We must also look at prisoner rights as human rights. But not every human right is a prisoner right. Just the fact that prisoners are a specific group of situation in society, a cadre that has been like locked out, and their own rights must be applied to them. But there are so many other rights, like social rights of people who are out, minority rights, cultural rights, gender rights, economic rights, human rights generally. So these are also other levels. And a deeper study, I would really want to talk with you after this meeting, because I would like to give you some ideas of how you can start something and also engage you with the facts on ground to move forward. What CURE is doing is what we are doing, as you can see now. And it is in the public domain. It is on the internet. And people have come from various countries having known about this to be here. I'm sure that's how you knew and came here. But how do you now apply what you have learnt here and see that you can translate it to your country? That will be beyond a press conference. That will be a more detailed private discussion. I sympathize with what's happening in your country as elsewhere. It is horrible in the world. But don't forget, the United Nations has made a declaration. All human beings, wherever they are born free and equal, and they have basic rights that conform to their dignity. Those holding them back in different countries is not the United Nations. They are locals from Myanmar who are holding back their own people. And that is why we want to support and build a network, a universal network for change, for the better, for all human beings.
Thank you.
I want to thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Your valuable, your answer. Of course, I would like to go and sit down with you, and if anybody interested, I'm not talking longer, just maybe one minute. But Thailand also the same. Our women are raped in the prison also, So I understand. I'm a prisoner. I was in prison. Still, I say I'm a prisoner. My whole people are the prisoner in my country. You are saying the country, and they're doing something in the country, ourselves and the outside. We are not allowed. Even last evening I'm here. They are going to, held ASEAN the Civil Society Conference in Myanmar in March, at the end of the March. I say our people are not allowed to go one place to another place. This is the movement. So we are like a chick in the, which you call in the cage. We are like we are not allowed to do anything. If we talk to the even foreigner in my country, the second day we got arrested, or we have to live by the boat, and like boat people, maybe nearly, you heard that in Australia, Thailand, and Malaysia, Indonesia, more than 100,000 people are, boat people prison or detention center. So this is the thing. Completely we are the forgotten and the unwanted people. Not only my country, in out of the country also we are the bona fide citizen of Myanmar. The problem is we need your help means only your state of mind and your working style, and we have to work together, because we only would like to depend on the civil society. We are very tired of the United Nations. I myself went to the United Nations, second largest building in the world in Bangkok, maybe 20 times with my people. I slept in front of the United Nations building 5 days, only asking for the protection, to protect my people, because nearly 50,000 people were killed or missed. Nearly 20,000 people were drowned in the sea. So, okay, I am not giving the speech because the very, very valuable times. We need your help means only to highlight our case. Our voices are unheard. Please, they carry this message to the world, civil society. We would like to depend on the civil society. Thank you very much for your invitation. Thank you very much for giving me time. Thank you.
Monsignor Ike, I wanted to build on your statement about thinking globally and working locally. In the United States, where our organization originated, we have the largest criminal justice system in the world. We have the most prisoners in the world and the highest rate of incarceration in the world. The prison business is a giant business, a very powerful business in our country. America has 5% of the world's population, but most people around the world don't realize that we have 25% of the world's prisoners, a higher rate of incarceration than China or North Korea or Russia or any of the more severe countries that we've been discussing during our conference. And in the United States, the popular perception of prisoners, relating to what you were discussing earlier by locking people behind bars and not wanting to think about them any longer. Our popular perception of prisoners is based on the media, largely what Hollywood tells us and what we see on TV. And while that is the only interaction that the average citizen has with the prison system, their perception of the people, the humanity in our prisons, is deeply distorted. So I'm curious whether the other conference participants from other cultures around the world have found a similar phenomenon where the harm, the dehumanizing of prisoners is either based on perceptions from the media, false perceptions, or perhaps that the entire prison approach is driven by this hysterical, fear-mongered, distorted view of who these people are, and I say people very meaningfully because they are indeed people. Anyone want to respond?
I could respond, but let me see whether others will.
Yes.
Your question is in relation to the public perception of prisoners within our respective jurisdictions.
And how that drives the dehumanizing of prisoners.
So from the Hong Kong perspective, and again, I speak only for female prisoners because I don't look at the male prison population in my research, but and anyone who's been at the conference has already heard this statistic, but 19% of the total prison population in Hong Kong is female, and among them 75% are non-local. So the challenges that women prisoners face in Hong Kong, in addition to be labeled as prisoners, are that they are female and they are not local residents. So there's a very high threshold. There's very little public interest, I must say. The Hong Kong government has domestic legislation which encapsulates the idea of rehabilitation. So our Bill of Rights reinforces the idea of treating incarcerated individuals with dignity and humanity, and that the ultimate aim shall be rehabilitation. And that's very much exhibited in the prisons when you visit them in Hong Kong. They're very regimented. The prisoners are not, it's not a penal populist kind of attitude that's expressed towards prisoners. And the corrections department will very plainly tell you that the happiest moment they have is when the prisoner is released, because they're very confident that they've given them the tools to live in society again as a rehabilitated individual. That's the situation in Hong Kong.
Does anyone else respond about their particular countries? Maybe Dr. Ting first.
Regarding the questions by my friend, I myself very sympathized for the human rights situation in your country, and if possible, I myself want to do something to support you. But the media, the human rights organizations, the United Nations, the United States, and the Western countries, they have done very limited on the human rights violations all over the world. What they have done for the 3,000 Falun Gong practitioners being tortured to death, what they have done to the 132 Tibetan people setting themselves on fire, and what they have done for North Korean people. I agree you did think globally and act locally. We should do step by step, and but we should also act internationally. We should connect and tell the whole world, take human rights seriously, take freedom seriously.
I'm sorry, I want to follow up a little bit on the points raised by our last the last question, and because to me it opens up the dialogue of the gaps and limitations of the Bangkok rules. And two really significant gaps come to mind when I hear your story about political detention. So the first is that the Bangkok rules they're limited in their application. And they're limited in the sense that they do provide that they apply to persons convicted by a judge. So that implies necessarily that they're related to the criminal justice system. And to me, it's a fundamental gap, because people who are detained administratively under immigration law or even as political prisoners then fall outside the provisions and the protections provided in the rules. And the second is that, of course, the rules themselves they are non-binding, and that there's no reporting mechanism. So very much a toothless tiger for the time being.
Yes, the perspective from Thailand.
I would like to share perspective from Thailand regarding the Thai media reporting on crimes, prisoner, and juvenile offender. I do agree with you that the media has also contributed to dehumanizing not only the suspect or of crime or the prisoner themselves, but also the victim of the crime themselves. In many cases, in many cases, the graphic and violent picture or video will be shown, and the identity of the suspect will be revealed, even though they are only the suspect. But the media reveal their identity, their address, or their names and surname already. So it means that they will be in most cases they will already be judged by the society that this person is a criminal, even without the court conviction. So I think this is one of the area that the Thai media really has to improve in the way they report. Additionally, the way that the media report about child victim or child offender, although it's prohibited by Thai law that they cannot review or photograph or video them, but in many cases I can still see that there will be video, there will be photograph and then blur their face, but still I don't think it's an appropriate way to report about them, or even their name were not mentioned, but their parent names were mentioned. How would you not know like who that person is? So I think this is another problem that it should be addressed. Yeah.
You want to address it, Aya?
In Japan, concerning the media problems, I think it is very specific for arrestees and who are arrested. I think not prisoners, because when someone is arrested, the media, we can see the very sensational contents in the TV program and or yellow journalists in Japan. But after court decision is finalized, the public forget the case and the arrestees. And so, but about prisoners, I think if the government suggested some good rehabilitation treatment to prisoners, most people think it's a prestige. This is a prestige for prisoners, and so I think many people think it is not good for us. I think. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, we have another question.
Yes, Lance Woodruff again. I'm asking not as a media person, but as a practicing Christian. I've come to this meeting. I am a lay Franciscan, a follower of Jesus who looks at the practice of St. Francis. Most of the time I do not wear a cross because I am embarrassed. I am embarrassed by much missionary activity. My question, though, is really focusing on chaplaincies in prisons. We're in a Buddhist country, and I would just like to ask Kun Sutari, are there Buddhist chaplains, are there Buddhist prison visitors in the jails and prisons in Thailand? I've seen lots and lots. I understand there are 41,000 Protestant denominations, according to a recent study, but I don't know. I see many kinds in Thailand, but I don't know about Buddhist prison visitors. Just to focus that a little more, the Buddhist idea of karma, Christians, as pointed out by Monsignor Ike, that most people think that if you go to prison, you deserve it. Christians believe that, Protestants, Catholics believe that, most people in most countries ordinarily say if somebody goes to prison, oh yeah, they deserve it. In Thailand, the idea of karma, I mean, do we care differently about people in prison?
Sir, thanks for the question. Regarding the idea of karma, I would also say that most people would also say that yes, this person has committed something wrong to another person, so this is the way the karma works. They deserve to be sentenced and punished, and additionally, it's not only sentenced and punished, but it should be suffering at the same time, like what they did to the other. So in that sense, I think the Buddhist interpretation has made it worse in this case. Regarding the prison administrative system, so far as I have learned, they also allow religious teacher to visit the prison and conduct religious activity with them, both like Buddhist, Christian, and also imam for Muslim prisoner as well. But in some of the prison, for example, in Bangkok, some Muslim prisoner would also report that they do not have enough food, that they require special made food, halal food, but in prison there is no this kind of food provided, so they have to make it by themselves. This is another I think religious requirement that has not been met yet by the prison authority.
Any other comments?
One very fast comment concerning our concept of mercy and our concept of justice, because the question addresses humanity's sense of compassion, humanity's sense of justice, and where our religiosity fits into both. If we run a wrong interpretation of our religious foundations, Christianity, Islam, Buddhist, and so on, Judaism, one will discover that we may make the mistake of limiting God to our senses of understanding the greater, the divine, omnipotent, unlimited, powerful, and most merciful being that is transcendent. Anthropomorphism, that is limiting God to the knowledge of human levels, anthropomorphism reduces the deity to the human level. And this is where the problems start. Interpretation, whether of the scriptures, of other scriptures, and of other traditions. And recent studies have shown, especially the leadership of the modern popes, that God's mercy is unlimited, and that human beings are created to represent and look upon this mercy of God. That is where the Franciscan tradition, for example, comes in, and many other traditions that are useful to teach us that serving those in prisons is like working for your own salvation. You're not doing something for them. It is actually your own self that you are liberating. When people think, I'm doing it for them, the lack of understanding is that you are seeing them not as you. And this brings me to a sentence I must make again. I said it in the hall. I think it bears repetition at this stage. This entire thing about the bonding of humanity. It is philosophical, it is spirituality, it is antiquity. This is what describes human dignity. The denigration or promotion of the humanity of any person translates to the denigration or promotion of the entirety of humanity. I am free if others are free. And if others are in jail, then my humanity is limited because I am indirectly in jail. That is why this universal appeal, we have to confront the inhumanity in prisons in a universal sense. To stand for individual rights and all the other rights, it is in essence our call. I just want to conclude by thanking the presenter of that question, who had asked where we come in as people of faith in the world of prisons, when our faith believes look at the world of prisons and incarcerated people as really the punishment they deserve. This is where we need radical transformation, radical reinterpretation, radical hermeneutics of the scriptural texts we read. And if in Islam, God is seen as merciful, and Islam is peace, and in Buddhism, we hear the levels of Buddha, the great ancient, who taught about enlightenment, about living beyond worry, beyond anger, beyond even sexuality, beyond and so on, and coming to virtue and charity. Or we see in Christ, in Christendom, the belief in love as the epitome of what we must be. Love is the principle, not even the law. We who are Christians or who are faith people, we are challenged. In the world of today is no more a world of only faith people. There are also those who say they don't believe in anything. But even simple rationality, simple thinking, sound reason and common sense makes it imperative for people to think of mercy as the way and not hatred and not vengeance. I am free when I am free internally and I forgive. This is also perhaps the message which Cure can live with us as we celebrate these days here.
I want to thank the panelists for their participation and the audience for its questions. Thank you.